Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Kuchment. I'm the Boston Globe's health and medical editor. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm pleased to be joined by Lainey Mosley, who is an Emmy Award-winning journalist who has worked for CBS and NBC News for the past 30 years. She's also the founder of CHOP Syndrome Global, an organization raising awareness for her daughter Lita's rare disease, CHOP syndrome. Lainey, it's so nice to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. I'm happy to be here.
So I really enjoyed the documentary. It was so moving and just fascinating to me. And I just wondered if you could start by telling me what inspired you to make the film.
Well, as you know, and I'll explain, I am a rare disease mom. I have a 27-year-old daughter with an ultra rare syndrome called CHOP syndrome. But this film isn't about her. I made this film because no one else had made a film about the aggregate impact of rare disease on families. And in my mind, what I was seeing out there, well, as I met people, was that these rare disease families are heroes. They're warriors. They are out there on a diagnostic and cure odyssey. And I wanted to celebrate them, but I also wanted to draw attention to the complete inequities that rare disease families face.
And tell me a little bit more about your daughter and her story and your kind of your journey with her.
It's been quite a journey. Lita is 27 and she was born in 1997. And, you know, she's not that old, but it's really, I sort of frame it as the dark ages compared to where we are now with the diagnostics and the science of cell and gene therapy. Because when she was born, there wasn't even talk about what's wrong with her, what's her diagnosis, because the tools weren't there. There wasn't exome sequencing to even help us try and figure it out. There were a few major, disorders and disabilities that people were aware of back then. But, did she have a chromosome disorder? No, she didn't. She didn't have Down syndrome. So, it was one of these like anomalies for 18 years. She wasn't diagnosed until she was 18. And that's not the case anymore. Diagnostics happen sooner, because we do have the science. We have, screening, well, there's screening at birth, but that doesn't really cover, the sort of more in-depth rare diseases. But there is genome sequencing now that can identify, all these rare diseases. And most of them are single gene mutations. And most of them have very, very small populations. So my daughter is the oldest in the world with CHOP syndrome. She's the oldest. She has 45 other kids in the world diagnosed like her, but she was the first in the world diagnosed.
Mm. Wow. And how is she doing today?
So, she's defied all expectations, and we kind of we talk about her as her own. She's a warrior because she has, defied so many hurdles in her little life, overcoming her medical issues and seemingly, bouncing back again and again and again. She has a lot of challenges. She's nonverbal. She's, intellectually disabled. She's small stature, and these are all things that are part of her syndrome. But, we we see her as this incredibly vibrant, like funny, full of life, big-hearted individual that is really the heart of our family, and worth fighting for every time. And we end up in the hospital a lot, as do a lot of rare disease families. It's a journey. It's a very medical journey a lot of the time for a lot of families, and it's an exhausting journey.
How did you decide not to include your story and your daughter's story in your film?
So Lita and my story, as long as it's this long odyssey, wasn't the story I was trying to tell. I was trying to use my background as a television producer and my knowledge of this, how long this diagnostic odyssey and medical odyssey is, to in some ways celebrate the moment in time we have now, that the families that are getting diagnosed now is so much earlier, that they're not just going home and saying, okay, good, people aren't saying go home and good luck. They're saying, what do we do next? Because they know that the science and the tools are out there. And the only issue is that there's, pharma and, the most of the larger companies aren't incentivized to really develop drugs for rare diseases because there's just no financial incentive involved. So as much as the science there, the burden falls on the families to, identify what the disease is, and then learn genetics, become an expert in your child's diagnosis, and then start, being a fundraiser to raise the money to try and find treatments for your kid. And, the burden all falls on the family. And the advocacy has to come from the families. It doesn't come from the medical community. And I think when you're finally in that position that you're faced with your child is diagnosed, you don't know that. You're waiting for the cavalry to come in and go, okay, who's going to help me? And they're not there. They're not there like pediatric cancer.
Right. And so even though you're kind of a kind of a veteran of rare, working with rare diseases, what are there still things that you learned from the families that you met as you made your film? How are their journeys different from yours, and what did you take away from the experience of spending so much time with them?
I learned so much from them, and I was so endlessly just inspired by their commitment to driving the science, not only for their kids, but for all kids with rare disease, and driving awareness. But what I really learned was that it's possible. This is possible in this time. The science is there for gene therapies, antisense oligonucleotides, not too far in the future, CRISPR technology. And these families know it, and they want it for their kids. I didn't have that hope dangling in front of me when my Lita was little, because the science wasn't there. And so they taught me, like, just, you should go for it. And, if not for your kid, it's going to help somebody else's child. And this community of rare disease families they are they get it done. There's powerful advocates, and they are heroes. And I just learned that if you want to look for heroes, you should look for them in the rare disease space.
What do you think are some of the most important challenges? Like, what are the things that we really need to fix to ease this journey for rare disease families, and maybe, speed more treatments for their disorders?
Um, you know, Rare disease in the aggregate isn't rare, even though there are 10,000 different rare diseases. As a whole, it's not any different than cancer. There are thousands of different cancers, but we lean into cancer, right? And everyone, just knows that at least there's a support system there. So, I think the thing that the rare disease community needs is recognition, not to be the forgotten disease. And that the most important thing is that people don't realize that the science of rare disease really does inform more common diseases. And, time and time again, it's been proven that, if you're doing the science with a very small population, sometimes you have these discoveries and these eureka moments that will help the entire world. And I mention it in my film. There's a doctor by the name of David Fagenbaum, and he started a company called Every Cure, and he set out to find repurposed drugs that are sitting on your pharmacy shelf that could potentially help every rare disease that's been identified. And so he did it for himself. And he said, if I can do it for me, what's not to say that there aren't drugs on the pharmacy shelf that could be repurposed if someone was going to bother to do the work. There's no money to be made in it because it's a repurposed drug. But if someone does the work, maybe we can have these incredible discoveries that helps other people too. And his particular disease was Castleman's, and he was dying, and he was having cytokine storms that were killing his organs, and he was given last rites like 3 or 4 times. He found this drug, a repurposed drug. He gave it to himself, and um, he cured himself. And those cytokine storms are the exact same cytokine storms that are happening during the pandemic with all the COVID patients. The drug that they used during the pandemic was this drug that was discovered for a rare disease called Castleman's disease.
So your film was shot before Donald Trump came into office, and now there is so much turmoil at the federal agencies, budget cuts, layoffs, funding freezes. What sort of an impact is that having on the rare disease world?
It's having a devastating impact on the rare disease, and it's demoralizing. My film was supposed to be shown at the FDA NIH Rare Disease Day this Thursday and Friday. That rare disease event that's been happening for 20 or more years was canceled. Um, People in the rare disease space rely on that kind of recognition that their rare disease matters, especially by the NIH, the National Institute of Health, rolling back so much of the science and the work that it has been done. The funding stream, is it going to dry up? Is that something that's going to change the landscape for rare diseases that we're just about to get into clinical trial or get a gene therapy? No one really knows, but people are very concerned.
I just wanted to encourage viewers, if you're watching us live, please feel free to submit questions. We'll leave time for questions at the end of our interview. We welcome your thoughts. I just want to make this interview as helpful and useful as it can be for especially any rare disease families watching. You interviewed several federal scientists in your film, and I'm wondering if you know if their jobs are safe.
I interviewed Peter Marks from the FDA and PJ Brooks from the National Institute of Health, and I haven't heard that they've lost their positions. I pray they have not. They're powerful and influential and super, super smart, um, committed scientists in the world of rare disease. So hopefully we will have some continuity.
Are you able to share any more updates on the families that you portrayed in your film?
Um, all the families are continuing to fight because they're all warriors. They're all moving it forward, if not for their kids, but for other kids with their child's rare disease, or sort of for the aggregate of rare. But two families I'll mention just for sake of time. One of the families, Casey McPherson, he's a musician, and he started out his career as a musician. But when his daughter Rose was born, she was born with an ultra rare disease, and he gave that up, and he made this commitment to become an advocate and, be a fundraiser and start a foundation and do all the things that the families need to do to raise awareness for their child's rare disease. But he's a special advocate in this space who has not only done that, he started a lab, and then he not only did that, now he's started his own biotech company. And I just think it's a great illustration of how far these parents are willing to go and how it just turns their world so upside down. Like, you never would have foreseen that a guy that started out as a rock and roll musician in Austin, Texas would end up running a rare disease biotech lab to help kids with rare diseases. And so these families, they just keep pushing and pushing to lift everyone up and to help the greater community.
I also, one of the things that I kind of liked about your film is it really shows kind of the joy that children with rare diseases bring to their parents and their families. You know, sometimes I think from an outside perspective, you sort of want to maybe feel sorry for the families or feel like it's just sort of a burden. But you know, there's joy in the parenting just like there is in any other family, right?
There, if not more joy, because we know that our kids have so many obstacles and have to work twice as hard to do, what comes naturally to other kids, learning to walk. My daughter didn't walk until she was 3, and I think you savor the successes so much more because when they happen, you know, it's everything for a parent, waiting for your child to say, I love you for the first time, or, taking those first steps or doing something independent that, you may wait, 10 years for. And it's bittersweet, but no one in the rare disease space wants pity. And they actually, I mean, speaking for myself, I wish people leaned in more and understood the amount of joy and how much we love our kids.
Yeah, that sort of flows into the first reader question that I wanted to take. You know, she's asking, please talk about caregivers of complex care families.
Mhm.
I don't know what specifically, you know, the joy is part of that, but you know, what else comes to mind? What more could you say about caregivers?
I mean, primarily the caregivers are the parents because, it's hard to find um, caregivers, but, the people you do find are really, I call them that my higher order people, passion and fortitude to to be helpers. Um, but it's also as your kids get older, uh, it's hard, nursing homes and things like there's a shortage of really um, good caretakers for disabled kids and adults, and the burden ends up really falling on the parents for the kids' entire lives. So we are the caregivers, for the most part. And, it's in the case of my daughter, she's 27, but she's probably kind of like physically and, intellectually the age of a 5 or 6 year old, and we all love that age, but you get to move on if you have a typical child, you get to move on from that age. And, in the rare disease space, we're sort of stuck in time with a child that then becomes an adult, and we call it, they fall off the disability cliff and they're an adult without the services they had for education as a child. And it just continues to get tough. So there's so much burden and unrecognized burden on families that have rare disease kids.
Another viewer is asking, if we are not in the world of rare disease, how can we be supportive? What can we do to help these families?
um, it really can start on a very small level of being a helper. When you see a parent out in the world struggling at the store and their kid is crazy and having a behavior, stop for a minute and don't judge them, because that child may have autism or may have a serious disability, and it's the best that that parent is probably able to do. And, lean in and help, ask, instead of shying away from it. I always find that people they don't want to be rude, but then they also don't know what to do. And so they do nothing. And so it can really start as simply as, lean into the differences and have compassion for these families when you meet them and see them, and, try and be a helping hand in the moment.
And another question, what part of the film are you most proud of?
Um, I'm proud that I got it done. It took 3 years. I'm proud that personally, I'm proud that the families trusted me with their stories. And I know that this film wouldn't have been made if I wasn't a rare disease parent, because they knew that I understood the road they were on. Even though our kids have different rare diseases, we all travel it, wash and repeat the same stories and the same heartaches, and the issues just being able to take your child out in public because of the disruption, and the medical things, and on and on and on. And you don't have to explain that to another rare disease parent. And so when I came and introduced myself and met these families, they knew I got it, and I was never going to exploit their children, and I was only wanting to celebrate um, their efforts on behalf of rare disease, and so I'm proud that they said yes and that they trusted me with their stories.
What advice would you give to parents who have just had a child diagnosed with a rare disease for which there is no treatment?
That would be 95% of all the rare diseases that are diagnosed. And the first thing you have to realize is it's a tough thing to get a diagnosis, but in some ways, you're incredibly lucky to be at this place in time where there is hope of the science. And the thing you have to do right away, if you haven't done it, or if someone else hasn't done it, you find community, because even if you don't think that's going to do anything, if there's no treatment, it's a start, and you build on, you find community, you create a foundation, you create activism, you start reaching out as a group, you have symposiums, you raise some money, you start networking at some of these events to find out, what can be done. And before you know it, you're an advocate too, and you're fighting for your kid, and you're meeting this incredible array of other rare disease families, and they will lift you up and embolden you to do what you have to do for your kid. You can't do it by yourself. And so the most important thing you can do is find your people.
What do you think about equity in this space? I mean, it seems like the parents who are able to sort of devote the time to do the research and reach out to scientists and be very proactive are in some way privileged. At least, they have a great education. They don't all come from, upper middle class backgrounds, but is how big of a problem, how concerned are you about inequities in this field?
There's so much inequity, and but my concern with the film was that the cross section was predominantly people I profiled do come from a level of privilege, and they to network and to know how to work systems to in their favor, and the ones I spoke to and they agreed to be in the film are incredibly, sort of dynamic, articulate, well educated. And that's not everybody, but it doesn't mean that you can't also be an advocate and learn your child's disease, and, fight for your child and call doctors and scientists. You don't have to have the profile of the ones that I, picked for my film. But again, there are a lot of inequities just in terms of a lot of people can barely get through a day, not on, just trying to keep a job and keep their family and their marriage together. And so the whole added burden is, it crushes families. And there's a lot of inequity just because rare disease is so kind of like the forgotten child in in disease world, because even with privilege, even if with all the money in the world, you're not guaranteed success of a treatment or cure. So no one really has an advantage there. You may be more articulate and dynamic and know how to raise money, but that doesn't guarantee that you're going to succeed any more than anyone else. And because this is a tough world to live in. And even with advantages, it's brutally crushing at times.
What do you most hope that people will take away from your film?
Um, I hope people watch it and either lean in, with empathy and compassion to what the rare disease experience is, just as a start, or the takeaway is, wow, that's incredible science, and I need to care more about that and how that, maybe impacts my life. But on a deeper level, what I really want to happen is have this film be like part of a social impact campaign that it gets in front of policy and legislators, so that they too can sort of, instead of intellectualizing rare disease, they can spend an hour and a half emotionally connecting with what it means to be a rare disease family and go, "Ah, you're right, this isn't fair. I have the power to do something, whether it's appropriating funds or just, helping start more programs at NIH or whatever. That this film needs to reach the people that can actually do something. And rare disease needs money, and it needs people caring that rare disease really matters as a health crisis that needs to be solved for the entire country or entire world.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that the film communicates effectively is the urgency, right? Because some of these diseases, the typical lifespan is maybe 6 years or 10 years or 13 years. So parents are really they're in a fight against time, right?
Mhm. The clock is ticking for all rare disease families, but for some more than others, where there is a steeper, you know, decline. Like my daughter's 27, but every year older that she gets became a year further from the possibility that there could be a possible treatment or intervention, because the time for any really lasting improvement for a child with a gene therapy or an ASO, or it's a repurposed drug, really is in the first 2 to 5 years of their life. And so the importance of an early diagnosis is critical, but you really have a very small window before you're you are you've hit puberty, or any of the things that happen that make it really harder to turn the clock back.
And another audience question is just what is next for your film?
um you know it, it's the marketing and distribution hasn't been figured out yet. I'd love to get it on a PBS or a Netflix or any kind of streaming platforms, for so more people can watch it. We have gotten it on a platform in Italy, funny enough, because one of my CHOPS families, who's done a lot of the fundraising and has been really successful at it, lives in Italy. And so she has gotten it, out there with subtitles in Italy. So I'm sure we're going to have to do a lot more of that to get it seen by the whole world. But for now, just private screenings if people want to see it. I am helping people set up private screenings until I can get a platform.
Hmm. That sounds great. Thank you so much, Lainey. Are there any closing thoughts? Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't ask you?
Um, no, I mean, I think the the part about rare disease that people aren't really educated on is that most of these rare diseases are they're called de novo. It doesn't mean that you didn't it's not inheritable. So it's just they're just single gene mutations, which we all have. We're all part of nature's crazy plan. And my daughter has a de novo, and that means it happened by nature. And most of these are that. And so you're not immune from having, this happen to you, or to your child or your grandchild, or your any neighbor. It is much more common than people realize, and they only realize it when it happens to them.
Right. Lainey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and helping me share more about your movie with our audience.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate the platform to do that.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.